This is the Conscious Hour, and this is part two. When does the trigger get pulled and we move into the World War?
To control the world's choke points, which would bring them directly in conflict with the Russian shadow fleet.
So at some point, you think the way that the war starts is the US Navy attacks a Russian boat.
So I personally believe that this will be a drawn-out process, and there's no real concrete flashpoint, because not only are Russian shadow fleet tankers being seized, but remember, Russian oil refineries are being destroyed by Ukrainian drones. And the Russians believe that it is NATO that is responsible for the sabotage.
So what do you think the catalyst moment is when this all kicks off?
I think we're already in the catalyst moment. I think we're already in World War III, because this conflict, it's going to expand outwards into a global conflict. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop this, right? Because again, you have these different competing visions of how the world should work. And the Russians and Americans are already at conflict with each other. So the next step will be the Russians come into this war on the side of the Iranians.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that's going to happen. Because according to Russian grand strategy, you have no choice but to save the Iranians. Because you're trying to promote this view that the world is split between the spiritual and the material. The Americans are the Antichrist. The Americans support individual hedonism. Whereas we Russians, we believe in humanity, we believe in goodness, we believe in community, right? So if that is your argument, if that's your grand strategy, then you have a more obligation, a more imperative to help the Iranians in their time of need. And in fact, Prime Minister Arachi of Iran has recently visited Putin in Moscow. Putin personally received him and said to Arachi, we, the Russian people, admire your determination, your resolve against the Americans. And I think that is a sign that Putin has entered the chat and that the Russians will start to help the Iranians as this war progresses. So let's go back to this map, okay?
Okay.
And the Americans have a three-pronged strategy to strangle Iran. The first is to use ground forces to establish border operating bases to incite ethnic violence in the country. The second is to block all the Strait of Hormuz and cut off Iranian financing. The third is to strangle Iran and cause the people to rise up against the government, okay? If things stay as they are now, America wins easily. But if Russia were to enter the war on behalf of the Iranians, the first thing that Russia would do is provide Tehran with reinforcement from the Caspian Sea, right? Because the Americans want to knock out Tehran's capacity to provide food, water, and electricity to its people. But through the Caspian Sea, the Russians can support the Iranians. But not only that, and this is much more important, if the Russians were to come in, they could also bring the Chinese into the war on behalf of the Iranians. And the Chinese could use the Belt and Road Initiative, basically the railway system, to reinforce Tehran from the east. So now you can no longer strangle Tehran because the Russians and the Chinese are reinforcing Tehran. Then what the Russians could do is provide financing to the Iranians. Basically, the Chinese and the Russians can say to the Iranians, don't worry about financing. We will give you enough financing for you to continue this war for as long as you want. And we'll use our resources as collateral for this financing. Right? And the third thing, and this is actually the most important, is that Russia could put Iran under its nuclear umbrella. And this would negate the use of tactical nuclear weapons. The Israelis and the Americans, if they really felt under pressure, if they really put in a corner, they could always choose to use tactical nuclear weapons. If the Russians were involved, that negates that option, right? So if the Russians get involved in this war, they bring the Chinese, they provide the resources and the financing to continue this war for as long as it takes, right? And now the Americans need to expand this war all in the world to try now to topple the government in Russia, because the Russians are the main backers of the Iranians.
And you're predicting that Russia will get involved here?
According to the grand strategy of Russia, the Russians have no choice but to get involved, because what will happen is that if you look at this map, if Iran were to be conquered by the Americans or the Israelis, the entire southern flank of the Russians are now exposed to possible attack. And that's something that the Russians would never allow to happen.
The sovereign flank, so what this from underneath?
Basically, right? But not only that, but the Americans already have close relations with Azerbaijan. And they already have bases in Turkmenistan as well as Uzbekistan, right? So you can see how once the Americans consolidate this area, they can now attack Russia from the south. But what's most important is the issue of global trade, where like a counter to America's naval blockade is by creating a Eurasian trade bloc that involves Iran, Russia, and China. If you look at Russia's north-south corridor, right? If you look at Russia's north-south corridor, it runs through Iran. If Russia wants to access the Middle East as well as Africa, it has to go through Iran. Look at China's Belt and Road Initiative. It goes through Iran as well. So by taking out Iran, you've blockaded both Russia and China.
70% of people.
How about that, folks? That's the chess game. That's what they're playing. So watch what happens to the world economy. Yep. Because a bunch of corporations want to control the world. West versus the other ones that have the resources. That's why every war we've been in has been about invading sovereign nations to steal their resources. Wake up, folks. The countdown's way, way, way long down the road. The next phase, stay tuned. It's the Conscious Hour, folks. It's your Conscious Hour to see if we all can stand up and try to stop this insanity. Especially the people that believe in the teachings of Jesus. I think it's time we all speak out, don't you think? Thanks for tuning in to the Conscious Hour. Please like and share, and please donate. In the 3.5 years I've been doing this, I've never received a cent from anyone. So it's on my dime. People say, why do I do this? Because I've been working on this project from the time I was a little kid, trying to figure out why the world was so, pardon the expression, fucked up. Thanks for tuning in to the Conscious Hour. Please hit like and share, and give me your comments. What else would you like to know about?